Order, please. So we reached the moment of interruption. The recognized honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It gives me pleasure to rise in late debate today to talk about an issue that is of some great importance to all Nova Scotians. And at the time, Mr. Speaker, that we submitted this subject for debate, we hadn't realized that this was going to be such a momentous day with respect to tax cuts. I see the Minister of Justice sort of waving his hands in an obliging way. It was nice. It's convenient, perhaps, for both of us that this subject came on conveniently today. And I'd like to recognize the government for doing the right thing, even though in a half measure with respect to this matter. It clearly wasn't an easy decision for them to make, given all that's been said about this particular matter over the last 12 months. But clearly, what Nova Scotians expect at the end of the day is that government does what is in the best interests of Nova Scotians. It was plainly obvious to many that it was unaffordable for us to have a tax cut back in 2003. It has become more obvious that it was unaffordable in the recent months. To stubbornly stick with a plan that jeopardizes our health care, our education, the quality of our roads in Nova Scotia was simply unconscionable. For many Nova Scotians, however, today's events come as something bittersweet. For the unions, for the Chamber of Commerce, for the nurses, for the teachers, and especially those men and women who put their lives on hold and fought unsuccessfully on this message in the summer election. To have the privilege to speak in this chamber openly and honestly, it must be a particularly bittersweet pill to swallow. But most importantly, my thoughts are with the average Nova Scotians who have had it confirmed today that at best their government made another huge mistake that requires more backpedaling on top of the backpedaling they have already done in labour standards and auto insurance legislation. And at worst, Nova Scotians learned that they were duped in the last election. While we recognize that today's decision was the right thing to do, we can understand the frustration that must be felt by average Nova Scotians who are finding that the government is now reaching back into their pockets to take money that was given to them starting in January 1st of this year. All of this was avoidable. None of it was necessary. One only had to look at the biggest challenges that were facing our province in order to fully appreciate that this was not necessary in the first place. The state of poor physical health of our young people, the underachievement in our schools, and the poor state of our roads. And not surprisingly, we find that we have the lowest expenditure for these types of services of any province in Canada. We had to appreciate that it was a mistake to go forward. We've said repeatedly that a tax cut is deserved, it is needed, but it is just not affordable given the mess that we find ourselves in. Should it all go, or is this enough? We'll wait and see. To date, we don't see enough to be able to confirm this one way or another. But it must go to areas of highest priority, like health. The Premier has said repeatedly that health was his highest priority. That's fine. But I'm left a little bit uneasy when I see the report of his press release today in the final paragraph, and one notes the quote, "While Ottawa's choices have interrupted part of our plan for lower taxes, as Premier, I want Nova Scotians to know this. We will not take one more penny than we need to manage the financial problems the federal government is causing every single province and territory in Canada." Now, two thoughts come from that, Mr. Speaker. First, when the Premier says, while Ottawa's choices have interrupted part of our plans for lower taxes, I thought that the extra funding from Ottawa was intended for health, not tax cuts. And secondly, they raise again the issue of this being Ottawa's fault. And to this, I offer three responses. Someone in the government, I would suggest, must have some form of amnesia about the huge, I believe it was $18 billion injection for additional health care funds that came, I believe it was in the fall of 2001. New money for health care, or the billions more that were added in this past year, which for Nova Scotia meant that in additional funds, in the year 2003-2004, there was $120 million, well, a total of $180 million extra for healthcare in 2003-2004. 2004-05, $60 million. 05-06, 119, 06-07, 134 million, 07-08, 162 million, a total of 655 million new dollars that is being injected from Ottawa for health care. This as a result of federal-provincial discussions. Now, the Conservative government is fond of raising the name of Roy Romano conveniently as the person who said that even more money was required in order to fix the healthcare system. But what is forgotten when they make those comments is that Mr. Romano has also more recently said that none of this money should go until there is reform of the system in the provinces, until provinces like Nova Scotia get their act together in reforming the healthcare system. And finally, with respect to the Fed bashing for more money, never has the federal government reneged on its obligations under equalization agreements. And while I would say more money to provinces is needed generally, it has never been promised. So why complain in the light that this government is presently complaining? Well, we say that this is obviously just an attempt to deflect. In fact, in our specific case, back in the budget debates of 2002, in supply, it will show that the honourable member from Halifax Fairview was asking questions, who's present in the chamber right now. He was asking questions of the then Minister of Finance, Mr. LeBlanc. And at that time, Mr. LeBlanc admitted that equalization storm clouds were gathering. Later in 2002, the record shows that the provincial finance officials knew there were problems, and the government failed to account for these problems. This is a circumstance of self-inflicted wounds. Blaming Ottawa is part of a recent strategy that is part of an old game that doesn't wash in this particular case. And Mr. Speaker, let me speak about the position that the NDP has taken in this matter. I don't take pleasure in repeating what I hear other people say, but on this occasion, it's almost ridiculous. The very first words from the honourable leader of the official opposition upon being asked today what was his response to the partially rescinded tax cut, it was, "This is what our party was asking for." Now, Mr. Speaker, there's a friend of mine back in Cape Breton, a good friend of mine, Blair the Bear Joseph, and he had an expression that rings in my ears when I heard that, and it's a simple word. Pardon? You what? You were asking for what? In response to what the leader of the official opposition had said, I'd like to table for the House a copy of the Daily News dated April 15th, 2004. That would be Thursday of this past week. In the past week, the leader of the official opposition made these remarks in response to the possibility of the tax cut being chopped. He said, "The idea that there is some kind of tax cut is erroneous in the extreme. They have not made this the cheapest place to grow, work, to raise a family, to grow old, to have made it a more expensive place to live." And then it goes on to say that even the Centre for Policy Alternatives, usually an ally with the NDP, is not in agreement with them. And it goes on to say that NDP leader Darrell Dexter now finds his party the only one opposing tax cuts. That is the context in which all of this needs to be understood. Mr. Dexter and his party have been nowhere while a battle has gone on. They were nowhere last summer during the election. They were nowhere last summer when this matter was raised in the fall. They were nowhere where in the debates of the House, questions were being asked of the Minister of Finance. A document was tabled by the federal Minister of Finance where he said it was completely possible for all of this to happen. Every 4 years, Nova Scotians have the opportunity to measure up the efforts of its government, to make it accountable, and perhaps rescind their mandate. In these circumstances, Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely clear that neither the New Democrats nor the Conservative government lived up to the expectations that Nova Scotians wanted from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's my great pleasure to rise and speak for a few minutes on this subject. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for Halifax Citadel. And I think that we have to give credit where credit is due, because the timing of this resolution in front of the House today is masterful. And it's masterful because it comes on the day when the Premier spoke, and he was speaking to Nova Scotians about the decision that he has made on behalf of Nova Scotians to recognize the changes that were inevitable as a result of the federal government's failure to adequately fund health care and equalization in this country. And Mr. Speaker, that's what I wanted to speak about for a few minutes, is about the complete lack of commitment on the part of the Government of Canada to perhaps the most fundamental issue facing Canadians, and that is health care. The federal government is utterly failed to fund health care. The Romano report indicated that funding increases were required. They have failed to deliver on that commitment. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the present Prime Minister has failed to provide any new money other than that was already previously provided by the Chrétien administration. And it's that decision, despite all the rhetoric during the time of the leadership race on the part of Mr. Martin, to deliver any new money to fund health care, that provides one of the problems that made the decision inevitable today. The second part, Mr. Speaker, of course, is equalization. Nova Scotia has been affected negatively as a result of equalization adjustments, and particularly on the failure of the federal government to recognize that we should have a 10-province standard for equalization in this country. Nova Scotians should be judged not on an artificial standard involving some of the provinces, but on a standard that involves all of the provinces. And the combined effect of equalization and the failure of the federal government to fund healthcare adequately, in a time when this government's main commitment is to ensure adequate funding for health and education, that made this day's decision inevitable. And I wanted to talk to you, Mr. Speaker, about how our government is committed to lower taxes for Nova Scotians, because that will improve the lives of Nova Scotians. But that we had to also balance that against, obviously, the importance of important social services and community services like health and education. But I also wanted to talk, Mr. Speaker, about the fact that tax cuts benefit families and low-income Nova Scotians. And I'm very proud of our commitment as a government to maintain those kind of tax relief for low-income Nova Scotians. Because it's those low-income Nova Scotians, those working Nova Scotians, that are so affected by the tax burden, because they're paying taxes, frankly, Mr. Speaker, in which which affects their ability to provide for their family. And by reducing those taxes by 10% on low-income Nova Scotians, they have some money in their pockets that they will be able to put to the needs of their families in the way they choose and not the way the government chooses. Now, I also want to talk about the fact that, Mr. Speaker, this government has shown a commitment, and a consistent commitment, to providing health care with the kind of funding it needs. We are growing the DHA budgets at 7% year over year. That's a tremendous commitment. We're providing, in addition to that 7% growth, all of the cost increases on the wages and benefits side of things, which, as honourable members would be well aware, is a huge part of the cost of providing health care in this province. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the decision that our Premier made today and which he announced to Nova Scotians, because it demonstrates that this government is committed to both improving the lives of Nova Scotians through tax reductions, but also to maintain those critical services which Nova Scotians depend on. Now, the honourable member in his comments made a number of reference to a number of things, and I guess one of them that I've been here long enough to remember a former finance critic of the Liberal Party of Nova Scotia, Mr. Down, who stood in this House and waved his finger at the Premier and the Minister of Finance of the day, demanding that when Nova Scotia had a deficit, that we implement tax reductions. So that, Mr. Speaker, that party was committed to not only tax reductions, but to tax reductions that would have enhanced a deficit that we already had. Now, that, I think, is somewhat ironic, coming from the point of view that the honourable member from Halifax Citadel is coming. I also heard Mr. Wilson, the honourable member for Glace Bay, who referred to the same tax reductions and demanded those tax reductions, again, when this province was in deficit, not as it is now with a balanced budget. So, you know, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the comments of the honourable member, but I think it's fair to say the Liberal Party has not been very consistent in being supportive of the government's agenda vis-a-vis fiscal responsibility. They're very flexible indeed, as the honourable member said, and in fact, some would suggest that whatever the government does, they are simply on the side of doing something different. Now, Mr. Speaker, there's another couple of things that I think that may be useful for Nova Scotians to consider as part of this debate. And that is, you know, and again, it's historical revisionism, but the labor standards issue that the honourable member referred to. And it is important to remember that I believe he's referring to what it would be called the Sunday Shopping Bill, which had labor standards provisions inherent in that bill. And I just want for the record to remind everyone that all parties in this House voted for that bill in third reading. And therefore, all parties have ownership in the decision that was made. And while I think upon reflection, there may have been some adjustments that may have been desirable, obviously none of the parties in this House thought of that at the time, or else they wouldn't have voted for the bill in third reading, because obviously no one would support it unless they believed the overall thrust was for the benefit of Nova Scotians. But, Mr. Speaker, to revert to the main issue that we are debating at the present time, and that is tax reductions. We in Nova Scotia have been the beneficiary of a very strong economy, partly as a result of the tax relief that we were able to provide last year to Nova Scotians, in which we had hoped to continue through this year. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to go back to the fact that I believe Nova Scotians want to fundamentally ensure that they have some choices with respect to their finances, that they have some choices with how they spend their money, and they want to make sure that they can make the choices for their family. I also believe, Mr. Speaker, that we all recognize that those lower income Nova Scotians, those Nova Scotians who are less well off than some of us, deserve tax relief particularly. And those are the Nova Scotians who, I believe, by virtue of the Premier's announcement, will be best protected today. Now, Mr. Speaker, part of being in government is making difficult choices. And Mr. Speaker, we've held the line on non-essential spending items, I believe. We've made sure that the budget was balanced last year. And that was a no small accomplishment, I might add, Mr. Speaker, because it was a very difficult series of choices that allowed us to balance last year's budget and create a small surplus. And now this year, Mr. Speaker, as the government has indicated, we are looking forward to doing the same thing. We are looking forward to balancing the budget in the upcoming fiscal year. We are looking forward to bringing down a budget that is responsible, that provides the kind of funding for health, for education, and transportation. Those programs that Nova Scotians absolutely demand. So we have, Mr. Speaker, I believe, a balance that Nova Scotians can and will support, a balance that will ensure that Nova Scotians have the services they need and they demand, that we provide protection for the less fortunate among us, and, Mr. Speaker, as well, that we have tax relief that will put some money in the hands of those people. In closing, and I know my time is running short, Mr. Speaker, I believe that today was a courageous day where the Premier made decisions for the best of Nova Scotian, and I believe that Nova Scotians will recognize it as a courageous day, one that they can be proud of their government. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member, recognize the honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we have, unfortunately, is we have a government engaged now in the blame game, pointing the finger at Ottawa. Every issue that comes forward these days on the eve of a federal general election is Ottawa's fault. It's a new line they've taken, something that they take now on every topic that comes before the House. It's not particularly helpful, I think, in helping Nova Scotian to understand how the members of this House are tackling the people's priorities. it's not particularly helpful when the Liberals stand up still trying to fight the last election and say, well, it's the NDP's fault or it's the government's fault. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to spend my time today talking about what the people's priorities are and what we're trying to do to achieve them, and I am going to do that. But before I do that, I really have to take issue with something that the member for Halifax Citadel said, and he said it not for the first time in this House. And I took issue with it the first time he said it and the second time he said it, and I'm going to take issue with it again the third time that he says it, which was today, or that I've heard him say it, and that is this idea that Nova Scotians were duped in the last election. That's his word, they were duped. The Liberal Party cannot believe still that they came third. For the first time in, I don't know how many years, it's hard to remember, it's at least 50 years, and maybe longer, maybe ever since the Liberal Party was third. The NDP's come third, the Conservatives have been third. We all recall that when Mr. Stanfield became Conservative leader, the Conservatives had no seats in this House, none. And the Liberals, the only explanation that they can offer for why people did not support them and have relegated them to being the third party in this House for the first time in a very long time is that somehow the people of Nova Scotia were duped. That's, the words that are coming to my mind I think are unparliamentary, so I'll try and move them out of their mind. But as an analysis of what happened, in last summer's election, I would suggest the Liberal Party might want to take a different line of thinking. There are reasons why the Liberal Party came third, and until they come to grips with those reasons, they will remain third. Now, what we did in the last election was we tried to focus on the priorities of Nova Scotians. We had said to the government over and over and over again in the budget debate leading up to the election that they were taking the wrong course. We said Nova Scotians need a break. They need a better deal, and delivering that to them through the income tax system was the wrong way to do it. It was the right idea insofar it was offering a break. But after 4 years of relentlessly raising regressive taxes and user fees, which disproportionately affect people in the lower end of the income scale, that at the time, when the time came to offer relief, that's where they should have done it, through those regressive taxes and through lowering user fees. But instead, after raising the overall burden on those worst off among us, they then delivered the reward in such a way that those best off among us got the most. And what the Minister of Justice left out in his analysis tonight, that today's announcement somehow benefits the poor, of course it doesn't. Of course it doesn't, because there's like 200,000 Nova Scotians plus who don't earn enough money to make any provincial tax, who don't earn enough money to pay any provincial tax. And to them, this whole debate about income tax cut or not income tax cut was utterly irrelevant, because it delivered no dollars and no cents to them and their family. And there was another 200,000. There was a total of 400,000 people, and I can't remember exactly how the groups broke out. It's something like 230,000 got nothing, and another 170,000 would get $100 or less. Okay, and that was what they were going to get, because they only earn enough to pay a little bit of tax. Where the people at the higher end of the income scale were going to get, for the very richest Nova Scotians, tens of thousands of dollars back. And that was the reward. It was unfair. It was not the way to deliver a break. Now, what's different between us and the Liberals was that their plan is just to take people's money. And the Liberals are almost saying, today's a great day for Nova Scotians. Your taxes are going up again.
Freezing user fees.
It's a great day because we're going to pay more to our government, because that's where the Liberal analysis stops, is we want your money and we know what to do with it. Right? And here's the Liberal Party, who've probably done more than any other party in Canada to raise the level of cynicism about politics. $100 million at the federal level evaporates. Nobody can say where it went. And there's no paperwork. It went to liberal-friendly ad firms, and they can't explain what exactly they did to earn the money. $100 million. And the Liberals here in Nova Scotia say, give us your money. We know what to do with it. Oh, I bet the Liberals know what to do with it. $1 billion gun registry. $1 billion. One followed by 9 zeros. $1 billion. And nobody's even sure if it's going to work or if it's going to need more money. Who did that? That was the Liberals. And if there's anything that's increased people's cynicism about politics and about the ability of their governments to do what it is the people want them to do, well, a lot of the blame for that lies at the door of the Liberal Party. Today is a good step because what the government has done is they've not only provided themselves some more revenue room, but they've done it in a way that's more progressive. They've left it alone. They've left the cut alone, the income tax cut. Not all the. Now let's not fool ourselves here. Taxes and user fees have gone up a great deal under this government. They talk about a tax cut, but there is only one thing that they've cut, and that's income tax, and they've cut it a little bit. So some people will be keeping all of their income tax cut, and the people at the higher end will lose more of it, and the 5% or so at the very highest end will lose all of it. Okay, that's making a bad choice a little more palatable. But what we would like to see, and what we said last year we want to see, and what we're saying again this year we want to see, is a break for Nova Scotians delivering on their priorities. And the number one priority for this party is the long-term care issue. We must stop the practice of charging residents of long-term care facilities for their health care costs. The only people in Nova Scotia who do not have their basic health care costs covered under universal Medicare. That has got to stop, and it has to stop on Thursday when the budget is delivered. So that's the other shoe. Today was step one, freeing up the money. We don't know yet what the government's going to do with it, but that has to stop on Thursday. We haven't solved the auto insurance problem in Nova Scotia, and anybody who thinks we have is fooling themselves. That issue will be back. It will be back this fall when the 12-month freeze comes off, and there is nowhere further to cut in the benefits available to injured Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians want a real break, a permanent break on their auto insurance rate, and this government with their Liberal supporters haven't done that. We need to tackle this issue of a tuition freeze. Again, the government announced yesterday $8 million new dollars for universities and colleges, but it turned out not to be $8 million new dollars. It was $2 million new dollars. Why couldn't they just say that? Why can't we just have a government stands up and says, okay, it's $2 million new dollars. No, yesterday's press release says $8 million, and people have to dig and talk to universities to find out, well, no, that's not really true. It was really $2 million. And that is not going to go very far to address the university's needs or the need to do something about tuition, which is, in one sense, a user fee for a higher education. People need a break on their HST on essentials. We said during the last election that we felt that one of those essentials was home heating fuel, but we think Nova Scotians have other ideas. We're sure that when we consult with them, that they'll say that's one of their priorities. There may be others, but they need a break on regressive taxes like sales taxes on essentials of living like heating fuel. We need to address waiting times. We need more resources in the classroom. This is all possible. It can be done within the context of a balanced budget. That's the people's priorities. That's what we need to address. Enough of the blame game, enough of the government pointing at Ottawa, enough of the Liberals pointing at every direction but themselves. Let's start addressing the priorities of the people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and time has expired for the late debate. I'd like to thank the honourable members for taking part in this very important debate this evening. We're adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow.